Hello, I'm here to talk about GetsuFumaDen. I think it's a long U. I'm gonna go with GetsuFumaDen, Undying Moon. Please forgive me if that's not quite correct. I just need to refer to it as something and get my thoughts out here relatively soon, because earlier today, when I was looking for reviews of this game, I couldn't find any, and it just released on Switch, and I specifically couldn't find Switch reviews. There are probably a handful of them up now. It has been out on Steam for quite a while, since I think May or March of last year. I had never heard anything about it. I think I had heard the name of the original game way back when, but surprise drop more or less from Konami, who barely do anything with their old properties at all. They do slot machines and really sleazy stuff, and they tend to ignore the older series. They have sort of been doing some stuff for Castlevania in recent years, but they're strange, and I wasn't exactly rushing out the door to give money to Konami, specifically when I saw the launch trailer for the Switch version of Undying Moon, as compared to the tiny little bit of gameplay we got in the Nintendo Direct from the other day. It just seemed so appealing. I love action games in general. Side-scrolling action games can be great. I'm a big fan of flashy, fun, creative visuals, and it just seemed like the game had a ton of style going for it. I wasn't aware of the Steam release at all, and even now, it really doesn't have that many reviews, which is sometimes indicative of sales on the platform. Just came out on Switch, barely any reviews, but I do want to share my thoughts. This isn't a full review, for one thing. It really is just impressions. I've dealt with just one boss on normal difficulty. By the way, normal difficulty really isn't that hard. It's not the most challenging game, at least if you're used to these kinds of action games, and this brings us to the first big point, which I will elaborate on throughout the video, but this feels extremely similar to Dead Cell. Not in every technical aspect, but in basic concept, many aspects of presentation, control bindings, mechanics, structure, the roguelite element. It's very, very similar, and I'm not just saying that as like a lazy way to compare it to something else that has some surface level connections. No, like even the roll animation here, which I'm pretty sure is mapped to the same button it is on the Switch in Dead Cells, looks very similar. Less smooth overall. It's also pretty bloody, although I do think it was an interesting feature that you can change the color of the blood. If you don't want it to look somewhat realistic, you can do that stuff. Or if you don't want it to get in the way of the other visual stuff happening on the screen. But honestly, very, very similar to Dead Cells, except in the responsiveness and control department, which I'll be talking about in a little bit. I would also compare it directly to Blasphemous, if you played that, a Souls-inspired 2D Metroidvania deal. And in fact, this game, I think on the Steam page, had described itself as a Roguevania, which in retrospect feels like a better term for Dead Cells as well, because Dead Cells didn't feel super influenced by Metroid, heavily influenced by Castlevania, especially the early access version. You even had like the Castlevania ghosting effect, I think. I've put plenty of time into Dead Cells. I don't know, a couple hundred hours. I'm not like an expert or anything, but I do really enjoy that game. I've been playing it for years. Something you'll hear about Dead Cells all the time is just how great the movement feels and how it combines with your attacks and all that kind of stuff. And it's true. Like, in terms of character movement and fluidity and just, oh my gosh, Dead Cells feels incredible to control. Controlling the prisoner is fantastic. Absolutely love it. I'll use that as a segue into my first section here, which is just about controls specifically, because I need to get the word out. This is something I was curious about beforehand, and I'm not sure whether people have complained about this on the Steam reviews for the game, but input is not very responsive. Now, I'm not a tech analyst type of guy. I don't have like hard numbers for you. I don't have a good way to measure input lag, but I can just tell you from experience, it does not feel responsive. And it's not the worst thing, but it is noticeable. And it will be even more noticeable if you've played stuff like Dead Cells that really focuses on fluidity and responsiveness of your movement. Blasphemous is slower, naturally. I wouldn't say that movement feels bad in that game, but it's not really the focus, as opposed to really steady combat and some platforming stuff going on. But compared to Dead Cells, it's night and day, and it can actually be kind of uncomfortable to switch from one to the other, because it's a massive difference, and I do think that's worth putting out there. I played the Switch version, can't speak to the Steam version, but on the Switch version, it does feel quite laggy, and that even applies to like menus and stuff, it can be kind of uncomfortable. You do get used to it. I got used to it over time. I'm somewhat more comfortable with it now and just controlling and doing combat. Although it's also, the combat is really heavy. It really pushes for combos. It really wants you to do all these crazy combos. At first I thought it was a remake and I was like, maybe that's an excuse for the lag, as if people really liked the feel of the original and it was a little bit laggy or slower, then they wanted to recreate that, but they don't have that excuse here. So I don't know. I don't know if it was a technical limitation or what, or if it was some kind of weird conscious choice. I don't enjoy the lag that much, although I did mostly get used to it. And when I was recording footage, I have this terrible capture card and it doesn't have like simultaneous output to a TV or something. So I just have to play it by watching what's being captured in OBS. And so not only did I have the lag built into the game, but I had some additional lag added by the capture card. It was very uncomfortable to capture this footage, and that's also why I don't have too much footage to show you. I'll mix it in with the actual trailers for the game. It felt actively bad to play in that scenario. Obviously, most people will not be playing with that much lag, but it just amplified the problem even more, and it really started to get in the way of my enjoyment. As I mentioned, the control bindings are almost identical to Dead Cells. You use the same button to use your healing items. You just have a few of those at first. I assume you can unlock more per run later on. It takes quite a bit of materials and sort of potentially grinding and combat to upgrade anything and to unlock new skills and stuff, or new weapons that can show up places. It's going to be quite a bit, and it'll probably take quite a while, but I do feel it's a satisfying loop. Sorry, I'm kind of skipping ahead to gameplay, I guess. No, you know what? Instead, let's talk about visuals and presentation first, because that is one of the biggest things that drew me into the game, just based on the short clips that I saw, and eventually the launch trailer is just that. It looked incredibly flashy. I love the art direction. The enemies especially, even from the little grunt enemies, have some really fun designs, and then the bosses are fantastic. I love them, and I really appreciate that the game gives you a little mode where you can look at each enemy in detail. You can see what they drop. You can see sort of their resistances and stuff, a bunch of details about them as it relates to the gameplay, and you can just look at the character models up close and spin them around and stuff, and I think that's great, and they're very aware of the fact that they had some great enemy design here. It can be extremely visually busy and noisy. Your attacks make this like purple blue effect thing that flies all over the place. Doing your combos, and when you can't cancel out of them necessarily, you feel like you're stuck there and you're just watching this wave, this insane spinning light of your character in there somewhere. I don't think that I lost my character all that often in the action, but it is a lot to look at, and again, I'm not a tech analyst guy. Just the resolution displayed in, I guess, both docked and handheld mode, even if there's a difference there in terms of resolution numbers, it does look kind of bad when you really zoom in on stuff, when you really pay attention to certain details, when you're not in the action. Very jaggy, it feels very messy. I don't think the art direction helped out too much in that department. It can be a bit much, and if you feel like it's too much just based on some of the combat you're seeing in the trailer, you might want to take that into consideration if you are thinking about buying the game or whatever. It is a lot to handle visually. As I mentioned earlier, you can change a couple of things about the visuals. You can drop screen shake, you can change the color of the blood effects. Overall, the game itself is very loud in terms of its visuals. And also briefly talk about sound and music. The music feels wonderful. It does feel, based on my total lack of experience, it feels somewhat authentic to the period of Japan they're trying to evoke, obviously a fantasy version of that period of Japan. It generally sounds wonderful. I think the mix is a-okay. I didn't find any aspect of that distracting. The music can be weird and uncomfortable at times, but that fits the world perfectly, I think. The death animation thing, I guess it might be in one of the trailers. I couldn't get sound on my capture card either. It's wonderful, so I didn't give you the death thing, but it's this really slick and very fast transition from fighting to, oh, you're dead. Now it's very quiet all of a sudden, and you're going to zoom back and reincarnate. Try another run. Impressed overall. Nothing has jumped out at me in terms of sound effects and music as bad or distracting, really. It does seem pretty cohesive in those departments. Yeah, there are just all these great tiny little touches that are really enjoyable. Just things about character, animation, attacks, attack animations, combo stuff. It's just great. It's just great, and it's certainly what I would expect from this style of game. Okay. Okay, I've talked about controls a bit. I mean, you can't ignore the lag. It's there. I guess you just got to deal with it. I haven't heard anything about them trying to improve this. I don't know if it's on the table at all. Like I said, shockingly similar to Dead Cells and Blasphemous, and I'm sure a million other Metroidvanias, roguelikes and roguelites that happen to be side-scrolling hack-and-slash deals. I think I did mention this earlier, but I've been playing on normal difficulty so far, and it basically just says, somewhat casual combat, but like if you're experienced with action games, go with this. And then they have an easy mode. And then I assume you're going to unlock more heavier difficulty modes after you've completed a successful run. So yeah, I would encourage anyone to just try on normal, basically, unless you really, really need some extra help. And you can change the difficulty, basically, I think at the end of any run. There's just a dedicated spot. You can change that. And as I mentioned, yeah, there's an unlock system for every single weapon. It has a ton of different skills to unlock. You need materials to unlock certain skills. You just have to unlock new weapons, period, which I think you can only do by finding them in the world. Please correct me if I'm wrong. They do feel very satisfying in how different they are and impact. Some obviously have very different speeds. I really like any like twin sword setup because I could be much faster. I feel more fluid in that. It feels more like Dead Cells in a certain way too, but they also have the much heavier weapons. You also have sub weapons. You can have 2 of those at a time. Another similarity to Dead Cells, you trigger those with ZL and ZR. They have a cooldown. I don't think that the cooldown of those is very well represented visually on the screen. Maybe I need to look more closely, but when I'm playing, it's not super easy to just look down and see whether a skill is ready to trigger again or not, so I just hit the button and see what happens, basically. Dead Cells does a really good job of communicating how much time left on the cooldown before you get to use something again. Decent number of sub-weapons. I've only unlocked a handful so far, but mostly ranged weapons, area of effect stuff, grenades, things like that. But pretty fun, and even with these tiny amount of unlocks I've gained so far, just for specific weapons, unlocking some new weapons, stuff like that, I really do feel the improvement. I really do feel like my character is getting stronger. Certain enemies that used to be a bit more challenging, I can just kind of carve through, mostly just through brute force. It does have a heavy emphasis on dodging, and this goes back to the lag thing because, okay, we have this more deliberate combat that's been extremely popularized by the Souls series and the rest of the From Software stuff. And there are a number of other games, even Monster Hunter will have that, where it's slower combat, and it's not that the controls are unresponsive. It's just that your character is slower, you can't cancel out of every single attack, so you might get stuck somewhere. You have to be more strategic and careful and considered in basically every combat encounter. That's definitely the case here. It's definitely the case in Dead Cells, the Souls games, all that stuff. But here, that lag really does get in the way. It does just feel like, oh, I know what I need to do now, but it won't respond quickly enough. Even if you're just standing still, even if you're not locked in a combo animation, you will take a good while to roll, for example, which is extremely crucial to avoiding damage. And that's messed me up. And jumping too does feel kind of janky. You have a double jump from the get-go, which is nice, but sometimes it's difficult to trigger like the second jump for some reason. And also just in terms of the ledge grab, it doesn't always activate quite when you would expect it to or when you really want it to. That can be annoying. That doesn't feel like a choice. That just kind of feels like something that's janky. But I guess this leads into my takeaway, and the big takeaway here is that somehow, and I've only played a couple hours so far, and it is kind of pricey at $25, and then there's like a $35 deluxe edition that includes the original game from 1987, released for the Famicom, and I think you get like a digital art book, mini soundtrack, stuff like that, that just stays on your Switch, I suppose. That would make more sense if you were buying a Steam copy, for sure. But anyway, it is kind of pricey. I'm shocked that I bought it at full price, but I am really glad I got it. So far, I have been having a lot of fun with it. I'm really excited to go back to it. It's intense, but not overbearing in the way that some of the Souls stuff can be. I don't necessarily feel super intimidated when I launch into a run. I just feel like, okay, I have this amount of information. I kind of know what to expect. I know which weapons I tend to prefer, how to handle certain enemies, and it does get significantly harder with each new zone, essentially. But so far, none of those nagging details have gotten in the way of me just having fun with the game. Maybe part of it is that I'm sort of pretending in my head that it is an older game or like a remake. That's what I thought initially. So I'm not expecting the snappiest, most responsive controls or anything like that. I probably should, because this is essentially brand new and comes from a pretty big publisher. But yeah, somehow it hasn't gotten to me, but I really wanted to share some of the stuff with you because I could see for plenty of people this stuff being a much bigger issue and heavily affecting their enjoyment of the game, maybe preventing them from enjoying it in the first place. So I need to say that much. Again, I'm sorry I don't have exact frame rates and resolutions and everything. It does look somewhat ugly on Switch. Doesn't combine well with the very busy art style, but there's so much cool stuff happening here anyway, and it does feel pretty deep. So far, for me, very positive feelings, but I can see plenty of reasons why other people might not be into it. But that's it. That's my impressions of GetsuFumaDen, Undying Moon on Nintendo Switch. Thanks for stopping by.